Kevin Talks Tech Live. It is so good to see you here on this Monday night. It's just after 10 o'clock right now here in our central time zone in downtown Minneapolis, where I am recording from. Got a little bit of a different setup here today, as you can tell. I'm actually right now in the kitchen, and honestly, this might not be the best view. Let me just do some adjustments here. And let's bring the camera down just slightly. Guess I have to account for the fact that I'm a little bit taller, but you know, hey, that's all right. So reason I'm in the kitchen today is because I actually want to be talking to you about a topic that we can all relate to, and that is going through the junk drawers. And we all have junk drawers, and in those junk drawers we find a lot of different cables and a lot of different electronics and gadgets and gizmos. And so today I want to actually take you through, well, it's not really a drawer, I guess, but I've actually got 3 of these just completely full of cables, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the common cables that you might find when you are rummaging through your junk drawer, what they do, and would be more than happy also again to entertain your questions as to perhaps some of the cables that you might find in the drawer. Now, I'm gonna just check here too, because I do believe that there is a way for me to see what you're saying and what you're chatting about, so hang on here. All right, I'm pretty sure that I can see if anybody is commenting in. So, again, this is my first time actually doing the setup. For being Kevin Talks Tech, you'd think that I'd have a good handle on the setup. But this is actually new and something that we're trying differently with a little bit of a different angle today. So again, let's talk about some of those common cables that you'll find in your drawer as I go through. This is actually probably a good exercise for me too, because I am going to be moving in about the next 3 months to a different apartment, and so I will actually need to go through these cables at some point here soon. So let's start off with this guy. I actually have several of these cables laying around the house, and I highly recommend you have these if you don't have one just kind of on standby. An HDMI cable. So this really has come to fruition as kind of the most common cable to now use across your house, whether it's connecting a TV to a DVD player, connecting to an Apple TV, connecting to another streaming type of device. This has really replaced those old analog cables that we've seen, composite cables, component cables, which do carry a digital signal as well. This is really the replacement to that. So I highly recommend having an HDMI cable in your junk drawer. It's actually a cable that I do recommend keeping around just because it is so universal. And they've actually gotten to be quite cheap now too. You could find these from anywhere in the price range of $8 to $12 at Walmart, Target, Best Buy. Get great deals on Amazon as well. So highly recommend picking these up. One thing I do want to tell you actually before I go to the next cable is, you know, a lot of times people will complain because these cables are not very long, but actually with HDMI, you don't want the cable to be that long. With digital, it's kind of an all or nothing type of signal. And so if the cable gets too long, it actually can cause some disruptions as one video and audio move from one end of the cable to the other. So generally you want to stay under 25 feet with these. This one is in the ballpark of about 4 feet, I believe. Actually probably about 3 feet. So don't go over 25 feet. Ideally 6 feet is probably about where you want to be to get an optimal signal across. So let me adjust this here just a little bit again. Like you said, I'm trying out a new thing here today. It's what I like about Kevin Talks Tech is the flexibility to do what I want here on the show, try out some new angles. Hey, if it works, cool. If it doesn't, we'll go right back to the computer where we were before. Okay, so another cable that I keep in my junk drawer. You probably have seen these already. So these are just great to keep on hand if you've got an Apple iPhone, an iPad, any kind of Apple device like that. Makes sense to keep a lightning cable on hand. I honestly keep at least a couple of those cables. And if I find them on sale too, I'll actually pick up several of them. I probably have about 8 or 9 lightning cables laying around the house because one day I got a really nice deal on them. So here's another beauty right here. And actually this would be an example of a cable that a lot of people have in their house, but they don't really have an extra one of these kind of cables laying around the house. So this is an Ethernet cable. Now you'll probably recognize this because this is what runs between your modem, if you've got a modem anyway, and your Wi-Fi router, and then your Wi-Fi router between any device that's wired into it that you're providing internet to. So a lot of times this can be a smart TV. If you're hardwiring into an Apple TV, there is also an Ethernet port in the back of an Apple TV. And these are just great to have on hand because anytime that you can wire into a device versus going wireless, it's going to lead to better performance, especially if you live in a place like I do where in an apartment you have a lot of different wireless signals around you. And there are also other devices that operate on the same wireless frequencies as Wi-Fi. Commonly, the 2.4 gigahertz wireless signal is quite common. If you've got a 5 gigahertz router that can do the 5 gigahertz, that band is a little bit less common. But of course, now as more people are getting these advanced routers that are capable of doing that 5 gigahertz, you know, you start to get a few more people utilizing that band and could slow things down a little bit. So I do recommend having a spare Ethernet cable laying around the house. Reason for that is just because one, if an Ethernet cable goes bad, which doesn't happen all the time, but that's one big reason. But the other reason is because it's also nice to hardwire in devices for certain functions that you might be doing. So for instance, actually when I do Kevin Talks Tech Live, I will sometimes run an Ethernet cable between my computer and the Wi-Fi router just because it does deliver that nice consistent speed, especially when you're uploading video in real time. So it is nice to have one of these types of cables around simply for that purpose, if you want to hardwire into the computer. And honestly, if your computer is close enough to the Wi-Fi router, I do recommend hardwiring into the Wi-Fi router whenever you can. What I really like with this cable is the length, and these things aren't too expensive. Even if you want to get a little bit long with the Ethernet cable, this is a 25-foot Ethernet cable, which works great when I run it between my computer and the TV because they are on opposite sides of the room, so it is probably generally about a 20-foot distance between the two. So these are nice, especially in longer distances to have. But again, if you don't have the like maybe your computer's in one room and then your Wi-Fi router's in a completely different room, well then maybe you'd either want a longer Ethernet cable or it just wouldn't make sense to utilize that. But that is something that I do like to keep on hand. Well, let's see what else I have here in my junk drawer today. I really do need to do some cleaning, and I'm so glad that we're doing Kevin Talks Tech tonight because it's a lot more fun to do cleaning in the presence of company. Okay, so this is another cable that I do recommend keeping on hand at your house. And honestly, when you're traveling too, this is a 3.5 millimeter cable. You'll probably recognize this as a headphone type cable. If you take a close look at the end here, yes, that would be the same size as a headphone jack, and you can certainly utilize that. A lot of people will use this in their car, is what's called the aux function, AUX. And with that aux function, that allows you again to connect your phone to the car. But now, unfortunately, a lot of these phones that are out there do not come with a headphone jack on them anymore, which is kind of unfortunate because that really, made things a lot easier with this cable. On the trade side, of course, is that a lot of cars now have the built-in Wi-Fi, or you can buy an adapter to be able to stream Wi-Fi to your car in a couple different fashions. But this is nice, one, because a lot of those adapters that do connect to the car to be able to stream through Bluetooth. So it's basically an adapter that plugs into the headphone input of a car. You would need one of these cables to do that. Or again, you can hardwire right into the car by using this cable on one end and then either using a device that has a headphone jack or getting an adapter, which I know I've got one of those in here too. They're a little bit annoying, they're a little bit cumbersome, but it essentially converts the connection going out of the phone to a headphone jack size so you can utilize cables like this. With Apple, they call them lightning adapters. On Android, it's a couple different things. It depends on if you're using USB-C, which is the new standard of USB, or if you're using micro USB. But either way, there are adapters available for both of those types of connections. All right, let's see. What other cables do I have in here? So we didn't look at this one yet. So again, another type of cable that I always keep around the house. I don't have a ton of devices that utilize this anymore, but for a while, this kind of was the standard. So this is just kind of your regular, let's see if I can get a better shot of it here for you. It's gonna be a little bit tough to see, but this is gonna be a USB cable, of course. And this is a little bit different than micro USB, which is the new standard right now. The big difference here, of course, is on this end of the cable, the face of it is a little more thicker. And I can pull out a micro USB cable here for you. There is actually a difference between the two. And we've kind of come to a point now where a lot of people, you know, are using that micro USB cable. But for the longest time, we were using this original USB cable. And I know I've got one in here. We're gonna have to dig a little further. But anyway, so this is great to have in case you have any devices across, you know, your house that maybe you unearth one day perhaps, and you want to utilize them. Like I said, a lot of devices don't utilize this cable anymore, but it's just good to keep at least one around the house just in case there is something that does utilize this technology. And we actually do see some devices that are out there that are powered by USB now that don't necessarily use micro USB. They still utilize this old style USB. So in that case, it is good just to keep one of these guys laying around in case you encounter any of those devices. Now, micro USB, that's a different story. Let me show you this. So micro USB has kind of become the new standard. There we go. Micro USB has become the new standard. And micro USB cables look like this. So if you were to actually put them side by side, it's going to be a little hard to see here on the camera. But the white one is actually, it has a thinner face to it. It's a skinnier, and this is going to be what's compatible between a lot more devices. I actually use this cable between several different devices. My Kindle right here plugs right into the Kindle, which is great. And not just that, not just electronics like things that you would utilize or think of as tablets and phones and such, but you can actually buy like blenders now, of all things, that can be charged by micro USB. So let's say maybe you're going on vacation or traveling, just plug your micro USB cable in, plug this baby into the wall, and boom, you're charging up your blender, which is pretty cool. So that is one cable that I definitely recommend keeping on hand. And what's great is that there are so many devices out there that are universal, that take micro USB. And so keeping at least a few of these cables on hand is very nice. If one gets lost, you can easily swap out one of the other cables, or maybe if you get an extra device that takes micro USB, then at least you've always got a cable laying around. So out of all the cables that I have, micro USB is probably the cable that I have the most of, because it is, at this point anyway, right now of me making this video, the most universal cable. So let's continue to dive in to my box of cables. Jeez. You know, when I move, I am going to invest in some cable ties. That might not be a bad thing. Here's another 3.5 millimeter cable right here. Here again is another Ethernet cable. Now the other thing with the Ethernet cables, so you saw the 25-foot one just a moment ago. This one, of course, is a lot shorter, probably about 6 feet, I would say. It's also just nice to keep a few of these Ethernet cables on hand that are in different sizes as well. So I do recommend that. And let's see here. Okay, here's a good one that I do want to show. Okay, so some of us are still using PCs and utilizing monitors and such, which is great. I know a lot of people have made that switch to laptops. Some people are even doing all their computing now on iPads and other tablets and such. But you just can't really, you know, substitute a good computer. So I always keep some power cables on hand for computers and for monitors. Monitors can be a little bit different, actually, especially now. We see some differences in power with monitors. But for the most part, PC cables are very universal when it comes to power cables. So you could take a power cable generally from one PC and you could swap it over to another PC and you'd be just fine. I actually have at least a couple of these laying around, and there have been times where I needed to power up an old computer, perhaps, that's, collecting dust in my closet, but it's got some stuff on it that I want to take off. And so it's just simply a matter of going into my box right here and pulling out one of these power cables that works in the back of the PC. And again, any of them can work. You just plug it in and you're good to go. There was a while, and things again have changed now a little bit, but there was a while we could also do the same thing with monitors too. So there was a lot of universal compatibility between power cables that worked with monitors. I'm starting to see things change a little bit with that. I think the monitors that I have, and I'm just looking right now, those do have their own special cable. You might be able to run the old cable with them too. I'm not 100% sure, so don't quote me on that. I don't want you to start any fires or anything. But for sure, the PCs have stayed pretty consistent, which is nice. So it's always good just to keep some of these PC power cables on hand, just in case you need to pull up an old computer, bring it back to life for a little while, or, you know, of course, maybe something goes wrong with your cable, something like that. Very rarely happens from my experience, but it is always possible. That's going to be another USB cable. Okay, so this is an interesting cable that I don't utilize a lot of anymore, but at least just having one on hand isn't the worst thing. And my gosh, like I said, I need to invest in some great zip ties at some point. And this isn't even the only one of these things, by the way. I have 2 or 3 of these just full of cables. Okay, so here again is another style of USB cable. Now, it's actually been a really long time since I've used this kind of cable, so I'm trying to remember if this is USB-A. I don't know offhand. I can't remember the exact name of this USB cable, just because it has been so long since I've used it. But this is a little bit of an older cable, and we don't see it used as much anymore. A big thing that this was utilized for was some of those printers before wireless printing became a thing. This was oftentimes the cable that you would run from the back of your printer on this side, and then you'd run this side, that standard USB face right there, into the back of your computer. It would work for scanners, it would work for printers, it'd work for a lot of different devices like that you would connect to the computer to provide it with that power, or to provide the transfer of data back and forth. And now, really, a lot of the printers out there are wireless printers. We're seeing a lot of wireless scanners out there too, so these kind of cables aren't as common. But just in case, again, if you're perhaps, let's say your Wi-Fi network were to go down one day and you were in desperate need to get something printed, yeah, it's good to keep one of these cables around. So I do recommend that. I'm seeing comments here. Malibu, I think that was your name. It just disappeared off my screen. I'm sorry about that. But the question was around Vga cables. And I'm looking to see if I actually have one in there. That's a great question. I actually don't think I do. I should, or maybe it's in one of my other bins. So a Vga cable is going to be a cable that we used to see that would run between monitors and the PC. So this is an analog cable, and it provided an analog picture. You'd plug one end of it into the back of your PC, you'd plug the other end of it into the back of your monitor, and it'd provide the picture. HDMI has now really replaced that today, so we don't see a lot of VGA cables being used, unless you are using a computer that is a little bit older, or perhaps maybe a monitor that is a little bit older. If you are able to utilize HDMI, if you're able to utilize, I'll show you another cable here that you could also use. I do recommend that because the picture is going to look a lot better. VGA, again, is an HDMI connection, and so it's, again, not going to be the highest resolution. It's going to have that kind of square looking image to it, you know, not a widescreen picture. But it is actually, that's a really good cable you bring up, though, because if you do have one of these junk drawers like I do, that's another good cable just to keep on hand, just again in case if you need to bring an old computer back to life, or perhaps maybe some people have a laptop perhaps that they need to bring home from work from time to time that isn't their own. They need to take out a loaner laptop, and if it's an older laptop and it has VGA, that's a nice cable to keep around again. And there are just other times too where perhaps, again, maybe your monitor goes out. We see that from time to time, and you just need to get a monitor to hold you by for a while. And I mean, people are giving away old monitors now at this point, or you could walk into Goodwill and maybe pay $10 for a monitor. And if that and a Vga cable can get you by at $10 for, the time being, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm going to show you another cable here that you could substitute in place of VGA, which I do recommend doing if you have the ability to do it. And again, we don't see this as common on monitors anymore. From time to time, you'll still see it. Not as common though. Let's see if I can actually get it out. Why don't I just show you guys what this looks like? So this is a Dvi cable. And this is going to have a better picture than VGA. If I can fish this out here. I'm just about there. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll show it to you like this. So this is what a VGA cable looks like or Dvi cable looks like right here. And that is, again, going to give you a little bit of a better picture. I still recommend, HDMI, just because with HDMI, it's just a nice, sleek cable. You'll notice the difference right here between the two. So this, of course, just slots right into the back of your computer. This one, of course, right here is bigger. It's chunkier. You actually have to twist the cable just like this. So I do recommend utilizing this if you can. But again, if you're in a pinch, perhaps, this is another good cable to keep on hand. Elle just commented in, one of our Kevin Talks Tech super fans, which I always appreciate her stopping in to check out our live show each week and the videos that we do. I had asked a question about what's the best way to store all these cables. And that's actually probably something that I need to figure out. Again, judging by the way that I have this. You don't want to really store cables like this, to be honest. Don't do what I do. I always tell people it's best to, not be bending these cables as much, twisting them around in all kinds of weird positions. And I know I'm not really practicing what I'm preaching when I say that. What I do recommend doing, and I don't have any on hand right now, but I do recommend utilizing like rubber bands. That's a nice way to kind of form the cable like this. Just kind of a nice quick wrap around to the rubber band, not too tight, but just to hold in its place. Another thing I've done in the past too is I've used little baggies. So you could put in maybe one cable in the bag, and that works especially well for like these little 3.5mm guys right here, which are very thin and bend pretty well to a point where you're not gonna, ruin the cable per se, but just kind of tie it like that. So I do recommend bags or rubber bands as a good way to go about that. And like I said, I'm moving in 2 months. And so perhaps that'll be a good project for me to take on prior to doing that. All right, let me see what else I have in here. Okay, this is another HDMI cable. And one thing you could also do is if you get to the point where you're like me and you just have so many of these cables laying around, I actually will sort these cables also by the types of devices that utilize them. And over time, they've kind of gotten a little bit out of order just because I've kind of been working with some different devices lately, and one cable ends up in one bin or something like that. But I recommend sorting these by perhaps your TV cables in one bin, and then you put your computer cables in another, and then maybe put your iPhone or your mobile cables in another bin. It just kind of keeps things a little bit more organized. And then if you put the baggie system on top of that, that also works out really nice too. So here's another cable that I do recommend having, especially if you're using 3.5mm cables. And this one is not quite as necessary, but it is just nice to have. So this would be an extension cable that you can use to extend a 3.5mm cable. So these things oftentimes aren't very long. This one, again, is about 6 feet. And the reason why you'd want to do this is if you don't have a sound bar or some kind of digital audio system, one way that you could connect a speaker system to your TV is by running this cable, which again is 3.5mm, from the headphone out jack of the TV, and then run the other side into the input of the speaker. So that could be with the system that again is a little bit older perhaps. that doesn't have the digital audio capabilities. But this is a nice cable if you do need a little bit of wiggle room to be able to do a setup like that. Something like this is going to give you, you know, depending on how big you go, could give you an extra 25 feet to work with. So this is just nice, a nice thing that I like to have on hand for those kind of situations. So everybody, not everybody, but some of you guys might also be familiar or have this cable already. And that is this, well, it's a lightning to a lightning to 3.5 millimeter port. And so this is going to be especially helpful for people that have iPhones or Apple devices. You may be aware, you probably are aware, at least if you're using a recent Apple phone, that Apple unfortunately did away with the headphone jack several generations ago now. I think it was at least 3 or 4 generations ago. And it was a little bit of a controversial type thing, unfortunately. But so they came out with this cable to replace the headphone jack. And I saw I just got a chat question in from Malibu 207, which I'll jump to momentarily. So they came out with this cable right here because, again, the headphone jack on the iPhone is now gone, of course. But there are certain times where you want to be able to utilize the headphone jack to plug headphones directly into the iPhone. And there's also actually certain devices out there that utilize the headphone jack for data. I'm thinking in particular of the Square payment system. So this is a thing that you can use to run credit cards if you have your own store or shop. That actually connects to the headphone jack of a phone. But again, if you don't have the headphone jack, you can't do it. So that's where this little guy comes in handy. This plugs into the lightning end of the cable, and then this plugs into the device that needs the headphone jack. And I lose these things all the time. I probably have 2 or 3 at this point. Luckily, they're pretty cheap. You can pick them up for $9 or $10 at places like Best Buy. All right, Malibu asked a question during that explanation there, asking if I could demonstrate how to connect an HDMI cable to an analog TV. And I can't show you a real-time demonstration of that because I don't have an analog TV to show for it. And actually, I don't have all the equipment to be able to do that. So I'll just tell you how to do it right now. What you are actually going to need is a piece of hardware that you can buy on Amazon. You're going to need to be able to convert between analog and digital. So a couple different ways you could go about this. If you have an analog TV, let's say you have an analog TV, and then you have a device that uses HDMI, like a DVD player or something like that. Then you need to get a converter box. And you can find these on Amazon. They're relatively cheap. And it essentially allows you to connect the HDMI connection into one side of the adapter or the box, and then connect the what we call composite cables, which is the red, yellow, and white cables, which I know I have over here somewhere. I'll go find those. That is the analog signal. So that'll then connect to the TV, and it'll allow that connection to be able to go into the TV. And you're also able to convert also, let's say it's actually backwards. Let's say you've got a analog device like a VCR, maybe you've got some VHS tapes, and you want to play those on an HDMI high definition television. It's going to look like garbage, of course. But you can do that. So you basically would utilize a box like that to run the composite analog cables into that box. And then from that box, you would run an HDMI cable on the other side of the TV, and that will, again, allow you to utilize that. That is a really good question, and something that probably a lot of people are running into these days as they want to transfer home movies, as they want to maybe pull out some of those VHS tapes that they may have laying around, whether they're just family movies or maybe they're even VHS tapes of old movies from way back in the day. That's something that we do see from time to time. As I'm looking at the clock here, I know we're approaching 30 minutes, but before I go, let me grab one more bin. So hang tight. Because I do real quickly just want to show a couple TV type cables, especially to Malibu's question. I think that was a good question. And this kind of cable is, again, good to keep on hand, especially if you have any older devices. Rarely use this one. Don't actually remember the last time I used it, to be honest. But it is just nice to have in case, again, that I need a VCR to transfer some old movies or to play old movies or something. And I know that day will come because our family has tons and tons of tapes of me when I was young on VHS, and we need to transfer them and get them off tapes. And in order to do that, we need a cable just like this. So this is going to be a composite cable right here. Commonly referred to also as an RCA cable. In some of my Kevin Talks Tech videos, I've actually called it an RCA cable in the video. And RCA is just the brand of TV. It's like calling a tissue a Kleenex, basically. But this type of cable is an analog cable. You've probably seen it back from the VCR days and the days of DVD in its infancy. Yellow is for video, and then white is for left channel audio, and red is for right channel audio. So you have 3 different cables that do 3 different functions. And the difference, of course, with that and what we see today is a cable like HDMI, which was sitting on my counter just a moment ago. With HDMI, everything runs through one cable. Left channel, right channel, audio, video, just all one cable versus what we used to have. And again, this is producing an analog picture. But this is just nice to keep in your junk drawer just in case you ever, need to utilize a VCR for some reason, if you've got some home movies laying around, if you perhaps wanted to watch a movie. Honestly, a lot of stuff is available digitally these days, but there may be a movie perhaps that is out there just on VHS and it wasn't digitized into DVD. So this is just another cable that's nice to have on hand, and you can pick up VCRs too, pretty cheap these days, which is great. So just another good cable to keep on hand. Before we wrap, let me just make sure there isn't anything that stands out in my mind. Oh, here we go. One more cable before we go here tonight. So this one, you're probably pretty familiar with this by this point, because this one actually has been around for quite some time, and I don't utilize this one as much, but these again are just this is just a nice cable to keep in your junk drawer, just in case. Coax cable or coaxial cable. It's got kind of a weird end on it, of course. Kind of sharp if you hit your finger on it too hard. So this is going to be what runs between the cable outlet on the wall that you have and runs into the back of your computer modem. It could also run to the back of your cable box as well if you do have a cable box in the house. And these are just, again, nice to have on hand just in case something ever goes wrong, if this little guy on the end were to break off or something like that. Sometimes also it's just kind of nice to have different sizes of these two, because if you move your TV to a different spot and you need to be able to get from the wall where the cable is coming from to the TV and you need to extend that a bit, this is just nice to have for that purpose. There are instances too where people want to move their modem to a different room, or they want to move their Wi-Fi router to a different room. And so this again serves as a nice purpose to be able to do that. This kind of cable has been around forever, and I don't know if I foresee that changing. A lot of people still utilize cable internet as their primary source of getting internet. Cable TV is still coming through the wall as cable TV, and so it's just nice, and they're relatively cheap too. So it's just nice to have these on hand, keeping them, laying around just in case you were ever to need it. And I, of course, don't want to promote hoarding of any kind here on Kevin Talks Tech, but it is just sometimes a little bit more convenient to have these things available when you do need them anyway. We've got some great questions that were asked here tonight on Kevin Talks Tech, and I thank you so much for that, of course. If you have not done so already, please go to my page and subscribe. You're probably watching this on my page right now as we speak, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I definitely recommend it. youtube.com/Kevin Talks Tech. And be sure to check out some of these on-demand videos, of course, which I've produced. And I'm in the process of working on some more videos. We've gotten some great suggestions from you guys in the past. And also recently just introduced you to my friend Jenny, who is the author of 123 Ice Fishing. We did a segment with her just a couple weeks ago talking about the tech of self-publishing your book. And so if you haven't done so already, be sure to check that out. And we are also working on more interviews here for the future too. All right, everybody. Well, thanks so much for joining me again for this live edition of Kevin Talks Tech here on a Monday night, the Kevin Talks Tech Happy Hour, as we say it. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all again next time. And as I figure out how to turn this off, by the way, I'll thank everybody for their comments. Thanks, Elle, of course. And yes, I do think my moving boxes are going to be quite full as well.